OCO, I'm Principal Chief Bill John Baker. Our Cherokee culture and history are the most important and sacred links we have to our ancestors. Our efforts in developing a written language and forming a sophisticated education system, coupled with our oral history tradition, have allowed us to preserve our life ways for future generations. What they say will take you through our nation's journey, from customs practiced prior to European contact to present-day Cherokee traditions. This series of videos is a valuable asset in our cultural preservation effort. It honors our past, recognizes our struggles and triumphs, and offers strength and guidance for tomorrow. Regardless of where you reside, never forget that as Cherokee people, we are all from one fire. Wadoe.
Wadegali scared da wadam. Ahan talakwats in their line. Do he you water in a gayan digadu hai salagi do don't. This is the ancient village of the Cherokee here in Tahlequah. My name's Ryan Mackey, or Wadegali Scale. I wanted to be able to come out here and show you a little bit of maybe how our ancestors might have lived. One of the things that I want to talk about is this concept of Cherokee identity. Our cultural identity is something that we have today through our modern culture and lifeways, but it goes all the way back to prehistory. Even though we don't know a lot about how Cherokees lived before European contact, we do have our oral tradition, the stories that our elders passed down, and a lot of those things are confirmed by the early writers when they wrote about the historical period among the Cherokee people. There are at least 4 things that we've maintained as key aspects of our cultural identity from ancient times all the way up through the present. These 4 things are not limited to Cherokees alone, but I would say that for our own cultural identity as peoplehood, these 4 things are integral to who we were, who we are, and who we will be. Long before Cherokee people had modern-day governments with a republican system, or a republic way of living, we lived in small villages like this ancient village out here in Tahlequah. The villages held between 300 or 400 people, definitely less than 1,000. Some of them were large enough to farm and take care of people out in the countryside as well. In the center of every one of our communities, we had a council house and a ceremonial fire. In fact, in order to be considered a true Cherokee community, you had to have a fire in the center with all 7 clans living within your community. Those 7 clans are representative of our kinship system. Our kinship system today is a little different than how our ancestors had it. At one time, to be Cherokee meant that you belonged to one of our 7 clans. That meant if your mother was Cherokee, you were Cherokee. If your mom had a clan, you had a clan. We were tied together from village to village by that same clan system. You could go to another Cherokee town and it would have somebody from your clan there. Whether you knew them or not, they were considered blood family. They would treat you like a brother or as a sister. Today, in the modern Cherokee world, we still have a similar kinship system. For modern Cherokees, it's not just matrilineal like our clans. Although we do have communities that maintain that clan system, and families that are very proud of their clan. As long as one of your parents, by today's standards, as long as one of your parents is Cherokee, you're Cherokee as well. We have a bilateral kinship system. We also have our Cherokee language. Most Cherokees today, they don't speak Cherokee. Very few of our folks, they've been able to maintain this, but whether we speak it or not, we all recognize the importance of our language, and we look to it for our foundation when it comes to worldview and the way that we understand the world around us. Many of our traditional belief systems are best understood within the context of our language. Another one of our primary cultural identity factors is that of land base. Here in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, we have a reconstructed village. This shows a little bit about what one of our ancient communities might have looked like. Cherokees have always been tied to the land. We were agriculturalists. Most of our subsistence came from the crops that our women took care of and grew. Some people say maybe as much as 80% of our diet came from those crops. Corn, beans, even pumpkins, and sunflower seeds. Men, they also would go out in the surrounding countryside and they would hunt wild game. They say that among our people, the primary source of game was deer. We also hunted things like wild turkey, squirrel, and even the woodlands bison. Our men, they hunted up in the mountains, along the rivers and the creeks. The relationship to the land was not just of subsistence, though. Even our women that went out among the woods, they would come back with herbs and medicines for their people. We had elders, knowledge keepers, traditional leaders that maintained a very vast store of knowledge about what each plant did. Many plants had more than one use. And when combined for specific things, they could be used to cure almost any illness. The land itself provided for us. Our houses, our clothes, every structure in the village, every part of our lives was taken from the land itself, worked by our hands. An important aspect of the land base is also the community itself. When you think about our people, they weren't small groups of Cherokees wandering from place to place. They lived in an area that they considered home for generations at a time. Sometimes, though, they would move their village from one place to the next. But for generations, they considered that one community their home. They identified themselves by that community. When they met one another, they asked, "What fire are you from?" This community relationship was very deep, very personal. Sometimes different traditions were slightly changed from one community to the next. Even our language was slightly different from one community to another. Oral tradition is another key aspect of our traditional identity. Today, we have a lot of different stories about where our fire came from, what the animals did, how the world came to be. We have stories about our migration, stories about historical events that happened within our communities and within our families. Some communities, they have slightly different versions of those stories, but they're all passed down from one generation to the next. We pass these things on to our children, not just our history, but how we do things. The way we made our pots and our baskets, our bows and our arrows, the reasons for the way that we built those things. There are stories associated with it. Our life ways, everything that we did, even how we farmed, how we planted, and how we hunted. It was carried on in our oral tradition. Last but not least, one of our primary aspects of our traditional cultural identity is our Cherokee language. Even though most Cherokees don't speak Cherokee anymore, there are a few young people that are trying to pick it up, learn it, and maintain it. For generations, Cherokee identity was tied to our language. Our worldview, our concept of reality itself was tied to the language that we use to describe the universe. Our Cherokee language is difficult to learn, but it's very valuable for our people. It ties our oral tradition into our clan system and even our relationship with the land and the community. For many generations, Cherokee people would recognize one another by how we spoke to each other. Even today, the modern English that we use is sometimes specific to our traditional communities. You'll hear phrases that are partly in Cherokee, partly in English, and you can tell where a person's from even by the way that they speak. It's doubly so in our language. When we speak Cherokee, the way we put an end on the word, the inflection that we use, sometimes even the word choice of one specific word over another will tell what community or at least what county you're from. there are many things within our Cherokee language that are deeply tied to our philosophical teachings. A different way of looking at the universe. One thing that we could talk about is that our ancestors, they didn't have a word for perfection. We just talked about something being complete. From the Western worldview, the concept of perfection is something that gets stuck in our modern heads, and it drives us to do things in a way that our ancestors might not understand or recognize. We always try to hold our fluent language speakers up, hold them in high esteem and high regard. They're the strongest keepers of our oral tradition and our lifelines. It's from them we can best understand our kinship systems and our relationship to the land. These four things, they've tied us together from the very beginning of time, and they still hold us together today. Whether you live in an at-large community or in the 14-county tribal jurisdictional area, you know where your community is. You know who your family is. You know your relationship to the world around you, your land base, and we all value and care about our language, our Cherokee language. You can go to a community full of strangers, and if they know who your family is, they know who you are. If they know where you're from, they know a little bit about you. We still find each other that way. That's one of our traditional teachings, that we go about and we find each other. Now those are some of those ideas that have been passed down from one generation to the next. Today, in our modern world, we have things like tribal citizenship cards. We have other things like car tags and different rights that are given to our people through treaties. But our ancestors, they didn't know about those things. If they were to look at us in this modern world, how would they be able to tell us? We all look different. We all sound different. But we still carry some of those same things our ancestors used to hold dear.
We have always been Cherokee. People understand what it means to be Cherokee in a variety of ways, and people use different approaches to describe what it means to be Cherokee. However, the four cultural identity factors I have discussed have always been with us as Cherokee people, from the beginning of time to the present day. Our language, our kinship system, our land base, and our oral traditions may have changed some over time, but they have been constant and have helped us maintain our sense of self. As we look to the future, as long as we are the ones who decide what it means to be Cherokee, we will always be Cherokee people. Ani chalagi, ani yanwiyan.